We're going to talk about modular construction and modular real estate, as Gilad mentioned. What we build, how we build it is becoming increasingly urgent for a variety of reasons, especially the pressing challenges of affordability and climate change and equity. And I'm honored to welcome three industry experts to share their perspective and share where we are with modular and factory-built buildings and new innovative business models and what to expect going forward. So what I'll do is I'll introduce all three of them in order of their appearance, and then we'll come back and have a conversation about the various aspects of the topic. The first, Naomi Porat, was on the founding team of Factory OS and continues to help run the company. This is a California-based company that combines technology with proven manufacturing methods to build multifamily modular buildings more efficiently and at lower cost. Factory OS is doing really great work with affordable and workforce housing, as well as innovative housing solutions for the homeless, and she'll be sharing more about that. Next, Professor Anton Garcia Abril. He's on the MIT architecture faculty. Based in Cambridge, of course. He's the chairman of WOHO Systems, which he'll explain. This is a system of discrete foundational components which can be configured and reconfigured and scaled and assembled for residential and commercial buildings. It's really neat stuff. The components are optimized for fabrication, transportation, on-site assembly, and efficient operation. And then we actually have a dual team, Josh Morrison and Tamara Knox, MIT DesignX alums and also fellow MCP alums, Master of City Planning alums from MIT. Their company is Frolic, which is based in Seattle. They partner with property owners who are facing displacement, and they co-develop those lots into multifamily cooperatives. This is an interesting business model, and we'll talk about that. This is new thinking on shared equity that provides home ownership opportunities to low wealth, middle income, and first-time home buyers. So it's a great lineup, and we'll begin with Naomi. Naomi, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, actually. It's the East Coast over there. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our conversation together after our introductions. I'm going to be walking you through the factory and some of our projects. The first video, I have three videos. The first one is just a general overview of the factory, and then I'll delve into two specific projects. There's just nothing compares to seeing the factory and the workers in action. So Factory OS was founded in 2017 to solve the affordable housing crisis by transforming the whole end-to-end value chain of housing production. I think we're having a little bit of a video. Oh, there we go. We're a vertically integrated company deploying off-site building technologies to deliver multifamily housing in urban areas, faster at lower cost and higher quality. We started with the value proposition of delivering 40% faster and 20% lower cost. And now, 4 years later, we've cracked the code on reducing costs by up to 40%. It's been a game changer. We produce, as you can see here, wood frame modular units for multifamily housing, both affordable and market rate, as Steve mentioned. As a mission-driven company, approximately 70% of our projects are for low-income families, the formerly homeless, and workforce housing. The remaining 30% of our projects are market rate or corporate housing. Our 350,000 square foot factory facilities are located on Mare Island, a former naval base, about 1 hour north of San Francisco. And as you'll be able to see from these videos, our vertical integration includes design engineering, a 34-station production line, real estate development services, on-site general contracting, and a software team that's creating our underlying operating system. A key piece of our company's success is our partnership with the Northern California Carpenters Union, which is truly a 21st century union promoting cross-trade training and work, and I'll talk more about that later. So you can see that was one of our finished projects in Oakland. And then this next video, what you're going to be seeing is the construction of a 256 unit development in San Francisco for the formerly homeless. Our customer for this project is Mercy Housing, an affordable housing developer in the Bay Area. And we also build market rate projects, which I'll show in the next video. And we're currently also building for Google for some corporate housing. As you can see, these units are built on an assembly line, 2 sets of units simultaneously. So these you see here, the framing tables. We start with the framing, the floors, then the units are transported with a conveyor system to the next station where our pre-built walls are added. After the walls are set, the units move along the assembly line where windows, doors, ductwork, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing are installed. Designed for the formerly homeless, the units are 350 square feet and include many special designs, which I'll show you in a minute. And then so here's walking into the unit, you can see this is our lower end spec. We have a range of specs going all the way to high end for corporate and market rate. But just to give you a sense of the interiors, this ADA particular design for our Mercy Housing's target population. So although we're vertically integrated with GC services, in this project, our client Mercy Housing chose a third-party general contractor, which we think is highly valuable as part of our training for the ecosystem of housing development professionals, which I want to address a little bit more later as well. And also just want to point out that although we're currently driving our customers to use our pre-engineered and designed floor plans, the designs of our exteriors are all incredibly unique and customized by their architects. When questioned whether we're able to prosper as a mission-driven company, the data speaks for itself. We've doubled our revenue year over year since our founding 3 years ago and have a $1 billion pipeline. And here's a rendering of that particular project as developed by Mercy and Episcopal Community Services and supported by a number of public agencies as well, as they're listed here. So the next video shows the on-site installation of an 110-unit market rate apartment building in Oakland. The project consists of 85 modules, which we produced in 3 months. You can see how fast our workers work in the factory and set in 10 days on site. And I just want to highlight our sustainability efforts here as you're seeing the trucking from the factory begin. We're currently working with Autodesk to track our emissions, although we already know that our process generates significantly less carbon compared to conventional construction due to less trucking for materials and less employee commuting. In terms of building material trucking, conventional construction requires continuous small shipments to a site where there's no space for warehousing a large inventory of supplies. In contrast, Factory OS is able to acquire significant volume of materials, particularly because we have our standardized specs for several projects, and thus we were able to reduce trucking significantly. Also, the majority of our workforce lives less than 25 miles from the factory, which is half the distance of typical construction workers. And this, I just want to point out, this is a higher level of spec and finishes for our market rate, very happy workers as well. In contrast to the prior video, the homeless project, this project is market rate and as I mentioned, different level of services or specs. So this was made a year ago when we had 200 factory workers. We now are up to 500 or more actually factory workers. So we more than doubled during this pandemic year, which I'll be pleased to talk about later in the session. So our growth is off the charts. And I look forward to taking your questions later this session. I think I'll turn it over back to Steve.
We'll actually turn it over to Anton. Professor Garcia Abril.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. So, thank you, Steve. I'm very happy to introduce you to WOHO. WOHO is the acronym of World and Home. These distant concepts that we think need architecture solutions. WOHO, let me give you a brief overview. From its origins, I've been practicing with Deborah Mesa in Ensemble Studio the last 20 years of our career, prefabricated systems without the need of being modular or scalable, just to somehow construct a cultural proposition. As you mentioned, Steve, prefabrication has been in the industry for at least a century, but always through repetitive, boring, I would say soulless buildings. We want to change that. We think architecture and the technology is ready to have this pièce unique, outstanding and amazing novel architecture with the intelligence, the systemic and the modularity of the systems. So after all this long journey, we refounded WOJO with the inclusion of Israel Ruiz as founder and as CEO, together with Deborah Mesa and myself, that we serve as chairman, myself, and Deborah as president and chief design and product officer. Our mission is to reduce through these efficiencies the environmental print and impact, the affordability and time, without compromising the customization or the architecture of the built environment through buildings. We situate WOJO in the epicenter of all this ecosystem of manufacturing, design, development, and assembly. We have started developing multifamily mid to high-rise systems with the conviction that we can reduce the problem to a very reduced kit of parts. They have a certain elasticity to adapt to any kind of design challenges and circumstances. All this, we want to make distance for the market trends, that is either to move heavy parts or to move volumes or blocks. We want to be capable to pack everything of these panelized or small chassis systems, reducing to these three fundamental archetypical components all the problems of architecture. The chassis that contains all the distribution and the wet rooms, the walls with all the embedded furnishing and parts, and the active slabs that contains part of the systems and the structural horizontal parts. We understand that these are components that are integrally completed with all the parts of the building. All the systems that are contained and confined under these structural shells that in 2 centimeters, a little bit less than an inch, we can give consistent structural, let's say, rigidness to the manufacturing and assembly of these parts. All this without compromising the configurability and to serve the market with its conditions and to give massing and formal and exuberant and exciting novel projects from 2 stories to any stories, because our technology is based in injected reinforced concrete over cavities of nano concrete components. I will explain this in detail, but basically we want to give the durability and the quality and the resistance to all the commercial typologies through this new material palette that is based in the novel materials that are available and ready to market today. This without compromising any of the creativity, the layouts and the typologies of all our build materials, with the capability to customize and add all those ultimate layers of expression, of protection that in any facade could be combined due to the design of our structural and our configuration openness. This, of course, includes software that will allow the end user to configure the last embedded furnishing and materials and finishing layers, cabinets, countertops, walls, flooring, etc., to give to the developer and to the end user the power to be part of that intelligent manufacturing and design process. I want to drive you quickly through our prototype that we built for a 1 module, a kit of parts. This is what we can transport in a single intermodal unit, either through the international logistics of maritime freight or trucked. So everything is dimensioned to start with a conventional concrete foundation. This gives us an ability to grow according to the technology of reinforced concrete. And here's where we deploy all these component parts, and we use concrete in a thin shell that fundamentally traces the bones, beams, and columns of the components, uniting them and being our labor, using the fluid mechanics to be the cast and therefore the monolithic transition from light HPC shells to a monolithic, old school, everlasting, a net zero cement concrete building. We do think that the minerality of these buildings, its monolithicism, it's a great asset in the ultimate carbon footprint of the long lasting life of the buildings. I want to show a rapid video of how in a single journey we can deploy all these dry components, connect them with that thin layer of structural concrete that could be either a full finished flooring or the stable base to any kind of added layer of finishes, and how that layer by layer, level by level in conventional let's say building practices admit the location of those components that come with extraordinary millimetrical tolerances, and ultimately they are, as I mentioned, united by that last cast of structural concrete. So from reality to fiction, we think that this pixel could build pretty much all the real estate constrained market today, and we can also obtain outstanding affordability and efficiencies without compromising the beauty and the exquisite feel and touch of the quality of the components. In terms of the fabrication and assembly, as I mentioned, this is an end-to-end product that we will design, manufacture, study the logistics, and also study the pace and cadency of a just-in-time production system that will, in unprecedented rapid overall timing, construct the project. We have to measure that from the time that the first components are molded through injection of molded HPC and self-compactable shells. There's a non-stop, just-in-time manufacturing process that will assemble the building in unprecedented time and security and viability. So this is pretty much WOHO. I'm happy to share comments and your questions. Thank you.
Anton, thank you. Moving on to Josh and Tamara.
Okay, can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Anton and Naomi. It's really exciting to hear your presentations. We're Frolic. We are a company that came out of the DesignX incubator at MIT in the 2018 cohort, and we are based in Seattle. So we're coming to this from a very different side. While Anton and Naomi talked about modular construction, what we're doing is really rethinking the development process and who's involved at what points, and ownership and financing structure to allow for a very different type of development to happen. And I'll just take you through sort of our key principles and how we do our work. In the beginning, we partner with property owners. So this is where we've started in Seattle, where the city's 75% single family homes. It's the case in a lot of US cities. And Seattle has gone through a big rezone, and we're seeing this in other cities around the country of allowing greater density on single family lots. And this is displacing a lot of homeowners that are facing higher property taxes. And so we're partnering with these homeowners. Right now, in the last year, have 15 homeowners in our pipeline, are working on 2 projects that are just starting construction this summer. And it's basically giving another option for homeowners. Rather than selling their home to a developer, they can redevelop it with us, stay on their lot, build housing for their friends and community. And an important part of what we're doing is breaking up the capital stack of projects. So we're allowing community to invest in our projects, and both at the construction phase and the permanent phase, and to see how this sort of plays out within the financing of a specific project. Basically, what we're building are co-ops, and a co-op. There's a lot of different versions of cooperative housing in the country. Our model is very inspired by a Danish cooperative housing system, where basically we have residence shares. So what you buy as your home adds up to 16% of the total permanent financing for the project. And so our homes in our first project are selling for between $50,000 and $150,000 in a city where the lowest home you see in Seattle is over $700,000. It also means that down payments residents need to make for our projects are between $10,000 and $20,000 compared to average down payments of $100,000 in the city. So a big thing of what we're doing with our model is allowing people who are generational renters and who don't have a lot of wealth to enter into home ownership and housing security. Another piece of our capital stack is built on community investment, as I mentioned, and then the rest is a blanket mortgage. And what happens over time is that resident shares, they grow in value. So your home grows in value relative to the market, but then you have a bunch of other value that's owned collectively in the co-op, in the housing project. Our projects are between 6 and 10 units, and we're working on single family lots. And this allows for the co-op as a whole to refinance periodically. And when the co-op finances, it takes some of the value that's shared and puts a big portion of it into a reserve. And then another big portion buys out community investors that originally invested in the permanent financing for the project and transfers their ownership to residents. And so what this is doing is basically, because we had this community investment piece of the financing, it allows what you buy when you buy your home to remain relatively small. It's always 16% of the value of your unit. And so throughout time, those resident shares buying your home will always remain affordable. But then as a resident, you also get to build equity growth within the community investment share, the community investment pool of our projects. And this allows people to build wealth over time, but it also allows future residents to enter without a lot of wealth. The reserve funds that capitalize on the value increase of the property, they make a very robust financial system for the co-op. So it allows for the co-op to continue to make improvements throughout its life. A lot of affordable housing tends to fall apart. And this is a system that allows the co-op to continue to invest, add balconies, add skylights, improve insulation, and continue to become a nicer project over time. It also includes reserves for operating and debt service. If one of the residents loses their job and can't pay their co-op fee, then the co-op can cover up to 8 months of everyone basically not paying their fees. And this is part of the response to building during COVID, and creating that sort of a system that supports each resident to have housing security and be able to weather things, but also for the group to do that as a whole. The last thing that we're doing that we feel is quite important is a lot of the discussions around affordable housing focus on housing as sort of a technical thing we can provide for people. And we're really thinking about the quality of the home. Our projects are very inspired by co-housing as a concept. They all have self-sufficient units, but then both of our 2 projects we're building now have common houses where residents can eat together and share meals. And then in this project, a big courtyard that kids can play out outside. Our projects try to integrate stoops and these semi-public, semi-private spaces. And a lot of what we're thinking is just how to encourage relationships between people living in the projects. Tamara, is there anything you want to add?
No, I think you're good.
Okay. Yeah, the exciting thing with our financing model, and there's a lot to it, so we're happy to talk more about it at a later point with anyone who's attending. But as a resident, you don't have to have a lot of money to enter into the system. And 49% of what you pay each month for your housing expenses comes back to you as equity growth, which is quite close to home ownership. And the total that a resident pays in our project, in our first projects, is below market rent. So we're able to give people who are currently renting and have generationally been renters an ability to access into home ownership in a market where that's currently not possible. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. So we'll all come back. And wow, I've got a ton of questions. This was really great. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing. Josh, you very astutely observed that this is a kind of a two-part conversation. One is a supply side conversation, and the other one is a kind of a demand side conversation, the product and the people. So let me begin just a little bit on the supply side with some questions that I had for all three of you. So we've got this interesting timing. I feel like in my career as a developer, we've seen the modular conversation come along every probably 10 years. And frankly, if you go back far enough, hundreds, if not thousands of years, there are examples of modular or factory produced or unitized, whichever we're going to call it. Is this the moment? Is this our moment, Naomi and Anton and Josh? Might we finally, as an industry, is this a tipping point? Naomi, you're mic'd there.
That is the most common used phrase in the last year, right? I thought I wouldn't do that, but
we all understand.
I would say emphatically, yes, this is the moment. And I mean, I could talk a little bit why, but I think our Factory OS numbers tell the whole story. We have over $1 billion of projects in our pipeline. And we, as I mentioned before, we've been doubling our revenue year over year since founding. And really it comes to the point that on-site construction has become completely infeasible. At least in the Bay Area, the rents have been remaining relatively flat, especially in the pandemic, or going down, but the construction costs keep going up. The inefficiencies have not been solved, and so I think a big piece of it is that we've installed over 1,000 units now. And so there's something to see. And I think that was a big issue that a lot of the startups over the last decade, and I actually had my own startup, Zeta, we had very small projects, not a lot of product in the ground. And so there wasn't that reassurance and that credibility and validation of both the price point when our promise and value proposition, and the quality as well, and the time. So yes, we have the proof points, we have the pipeline, we have the technology, we have the partnerships with the right companies, including Autodesk, who's on our prior panel, to make this work. And I'd like to say that, single family home manufactured in modular housing has been relatively successful for a certain swath of the population. It has served lower income housing. But I think the question is really, will it work for multifamily, multi-story? And that's where there's been a lot of kind of failures.
Anton, do you think, certainly you can answer the question, but also I was wondering, are you seeing, do we need to describe this as something different? If we continue to call it modular, there's a perception about what modular is. Do you think we need to call it something different?
Oh, yes, totally. We need to call it architecture. Because architecture is this. Architecture is owning the full process that goes from quarrying all the way to managing the assembly. And I'm with Naomi. Yes, now is the moment that offsite tech and the industry will grow and will interpret a very old concept of what is architecture. And the market had sliced and separated and make very inefficient all the different stakeholders of the art of putting together a building, from the developers all the way to the subs. And I think the new architecture that is coming, due to the technology being ready, the market being ready, and foremost, the need of people to have quality architecture and urban environment, and the need of the industry to really reduce its impact in terms of waste, noise, disturbance, carbon footprint, etc. No? So yes, I think it's a new architecture that is coming, and it's an historical moment where a building is not going to be grounded on site as it has been always. The industrial architectonic revolution means that the offsite is coming to build buildings in a different way that are later assembled on the field. It's a game changer.
Thank you for that. So there's some recent research from Washington State University that currently modular, now I don't know how they're defining modular, only accounts for 5% of new projects in commercial and residential real estate right now, which suggests that it would continue to be kind of a niche solution. But I would imagine we should start thinking about it differently, that it's the solution to everything, right?
I think there's a lot of wisdom in the markets, and as soon as companies like Factory OS, Wojo, and others that are putting upside down the full procedure and system and methodologies and business model, then the 5%, the risky 5%, will be those that build as buildings are built today.
Yeah.
I also think not only looking at what percentage it is now, but what the growth rate has been.
Right.
And, Modular Building Institute published some data for last year that showed that the great growth nationwide in modular, and that includes not just multifamily housing, but commercial structures as well, was up 13%. But in California, or in some regions, including California, it was up 30% last year. So
wow.
So yes, it has been a very niche market, but let's look at the growth rate over the next few years, and you'll see some remarkable growth.
Josh, in your world, are you agnostic to how the building gets built, or I'm assuming it's sort of part of your broader mission to also take into account the product delivery in addition to the human element?
Yeah, I think a focus of ours, which I feel that Naomi and Anton have also spoken really well to, is that is breaking the stigma of affordable housing with cheap housing, that to make it affordable, it should be poor quality. And a big focus of ours is what are a lot of the inefficiencies in the development process that by avoiding those, we can create deeper levels of affordability while actually pursuing a very high standard of building quality. Our construction budgets are not much lower than market rate housing, but our units will cost much less. And that's part of, because we're not having to put upfront capital to buy the property, we're partnering with the property owner. Some of the profit is built into the co-op. And but that being said, we're very interested in continuing to explore. I feel like I got a lot of ideas just hearing Naomi and Anton's presentations of just how we can think about modularity in the way that in what we offer, and how that can actually provide even deeper levels of affordability.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Naomi, to that point, I heard you refer to the myth that standardization is synonymous with unimaginative. And Anton, you have also spoken to that. Can you both comment on we can now do things that are so much more interesting architecturally, even though it's standardized?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. I think people don't understand standardization in housing, although we all understand it in the auto industry. I mean, we have the chassis and the internal working is standardized, so that because there's continuous improvement in the industry, which is what we're doing in our factory as well. And that then the exterior cladding, the colors, the interior finishes can then be customized. And if the IT people could put up some of my images of our exteriors, I could just walk through them. Should they?
Yeah, we may have a couple of images for you here, Naomi.
Yeah, I just wanted to give you a sense. I mean, these are several of our projects, and you'll see that each one of them, the exterior facades every project looks completely different. You can just roll through these quickly, so I don't want to take a lot of time, but as you can see, and then the interiors and the basic structure of the mods, we have standardized unit floor plans that have integrated MEP, and that allows us to purchase in bulk and also to reduce the cost. So by standardization, we've been able to reduce the cost an additional 20% for our customers. So these are just some images. Yeah.
So Anton, you mentioned standardization versus uniqueness, and I think the WOHO, maybe the WOHO library of optionality is a little broader than Naomi's world. Is there a tension between standardization and uniqueness? Where do we end up having a bespoke building again, which is we're trying to avoid that?
Well, I think that's a cultural imposition. Okay, this compatibility of something that is very universal with the personality of the place, the community, and the individual. I think this encounter is fundamental. Architecture is about this. You can do collective housing, but you still have to respond to individual needs, to particular responses to the site. So this is not novel. This is just how architecture is. And this was the failure of industrial, repetitive, soulless buildings that we've seen in Europe and in Asia and in the United States. No? So I think this is a fundamental part of our industry, and it will be our success if we are capable to integrate into the cultural project of architecture as a builder of our I would say social legacy, as a provider of primary needs, of shelter, of comfort, of very humane primary needs that are not fully served even in rich communities, and without depauperating or without compromising the quality of the space. And I think that the contemporary companies that are embedded in this mission, in building differently, smartly, are attending these architectural principles.
So I have two specific questions. One is certain countries build with certain kinds of materials. Do you think the WOHO solution is better in a country that's comfortable with concrete versus a country that does a lot of stick-built construction?
Yeah, I'm totally convinced that the last trends of deforesting the world as a solution to provide ecologically balanced material for construction is not the solution.
Right.
You think that new materials that arise, that provide all the performance qualities, resistant and aesthetical qualities, are the ones that will solve this question. And right. We call it concrete because we don't know how to name it, but it's a fundamental mineral mix that has net zero carbon in a proportion not above 30%, and the rest is aggregates, sand, and other, let's say, conglomerates that right. create a monolithic mineral building.
Thank you for that.
We do believe that this is the combination that allows the optimization of manufacturing through additive manufacturing techniques and molded and counter-molded injections that are efficient, safe, and quick, and very affordable compared to framed solutions that require right. A lot of labor, a lot of parts, and a lot of embedded carbon on it.
So the future of materials is part of this conversation as well. So thank you for that, Anton. Josh, I'm going to be with you in one moment. I have one more supply side question. Naomi and Anton, we were talking about the current ecosystem and Naomi, you brought this up, the current ecosystem that delivers housing supply and building supply generally. Should we be reducing reducing production costs and site time, or both? Presumably we want to get at each slice of the ecosystem. Is that what you would say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are driving hard on every piece of, that's what I said in the beginning of the value chain, and I could talk a little bit about each one, but the supply chain, I thought this is where you're going to go with the disruption of the supply chain during right. COVID, and how important we realize our supply chain partnerships are. And we did a number of things, and I'll jump to labor as part of that as well. But we did a number of things with our supply chain, going directly to the manufacturers. We needed to, guarantee our inventory while inventory worldwide was low. How do we do that? We established supply agreements directly with the lumber mills to obtain more consistent and less expensive access, which actually reduced our costs by 15%. And then most recently, where there'll be an announcement tomorrow, we're very excited. We have a very the largest and oldest building materials company as our partner now. And I think what's important, and they invested in the company. In addition, we're doing product development, but I think what's important with our supply chain partners, which it's an explosive growth right now in that piece of our business, is reinventing basic materials like drywall and insulation and other things that were designed and developed for on-site construction. If they look and feel and perform, they should differently for a factory environment. And so, especially something like drywall, where the process is so elongated, because it's fine, you have time to dry on the site while other subs come in, but we're moving our product through the factory so fast. So we're going to be reinventing a number of really basic building materials with some of the largest building materials companies in the world. We're very excited about that.
And Anton, you're doing that as well, as you just shared with us. Do you, Anton, think that the global supply chain for steel and concrete shows more promise than the global supply chain for forest products?
Well, firstly, WOHO doesn't use conventional steel nor concrete, so right. It has been partnering with Lafarge Holcim, and we are installed in our manufacturing facility in the quarry inside. So our transportation cost in manufacturing is pretty much zero, because we pretty much harvest or extract all the aggregates and the 70% of our materials just from our backyard. And we will have atomized, small, very efficient manufacturing plants that will deliver directly to the field. For example, our first project being built now is just less than 20 miles afar from where our material source is kept. And we want to map and print the real embedded carbon of using mineral materials over the conventional palette. As Naomi just said, we're not designed to or dimensioned for the logic of on-site construction. Okay, so we have reinvented the boards or the studs or all these, like a lot of parts that put together create a drywall, and we just mold a mineral, structurally efficient and stiff and resistant and beautiful shell that with less than a thickness that's two board walls performs much better. So this is part of the material and technological discourse that
Naomi, could your units possibly not look like stick-built boxes in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, it'll be interesting to look at various building materials and technologies, and maybe looking at hybrid. But I think also because we're type 3 construction, wood frame, we can only go up to 5 stories over podiums. So a concrete solution or like H steel frame are really interesting to us as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Naomi, and Josh. Thanks for your patience on the supply side. I'm fascinated by that, but I'm also fascinated by the new business models. We mentioned the various shared equity models and other solutions for affordability, so that are more responsive to the local needs. Have you investigated? Presumably, you have. The different versions and variations. What are you seeing out there on the human side, on the demand side, that you think is innovative and interesting and shows promise for solving this terrible housing problem?
Tamara, I just want to give you a chance to
Tamara's here. Hi, Tamara.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Okay, so either of you, or Tamara, if you want to jump in here, you can.
I think so Josh mentioned that we are partnering with property owners that live in single family homes and are just really facing displacement without a very good option. The kind of the human side of it, just the number of property owners that have approached us wanting to redevelop their lots, not only kind of thirsty for an opportunity to stay, but also wanting that kind of the human element of connection with the people that they live with. there's just so clearly a desire to live in a different way that we've just been consistently seeing over this past year. Josh, I don't know if.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing you mentioned, Steve, of other models and other ways that people are exploring some of these themes. We've been really lucky to plug into the ecosystem of thought leaders and developers and banks that have really been looking at this issue of how to create more affordable paths to home ownership and how to allow for more community ownership and development. And there's a group called the Purpose Foundation that we've connected with this last year that is starting to organize there's 6 companies we've been kind of recently connected with that are looking at very similar issues to us. And the Purpose Foundation, they focus a lot on how capital can be structured in a way that aligns with social mission and purpose. And they've been supporting us and these other companies and thinking through how to continue to build community-owned real estate and have community drive the real estate development process, and to allow for learning across these different organizations of what is working well and what can continue to work well. So I think what we're seeing is that there's a quite large movement of interest in this. A small anecdote is the bank that's providing our construction loan. When the loan officer did our project, normally these loan committee meetings have 3 people in them that either give the stamp go ahead or not. And there were 35 people that just showed up in this meeting because they were so curious to hear about this other form of cooperative ownership within the bank, and just a very different way of doing things. There's a lot of interest right now in co-ops and in cooperative ownership.
Josh, do you think that there is a category in prop tech, or where prop tech intersects fintech, with companies that are providing shared equity? They're helping people with down payments, which are ominous, and also it's also happening on the rental side with security deposits and things like that. Do you think they will be able to get traction?
Yes, I think that they will. I think in the landscape of companies we've seen, there's also quite a bit of and this isn't a new thing, although the fintech side of it is new, but predatory lending and taking advantage of people in situations where they have no other options is a real thing, and has happened historically. And I think there's a mix. There's some companies that do have a strong social mission and are trying to do good, and there's a lot that are preying on people that are in a tough situation right now. So I think it's what's unfortunate is it's hard for the average homeowner to be able to decipher what's what.
Right.
And
I've just added into that
sure,
it's not always clear. It's there's a lot of gray zone there. And so going back to a homeowner navigating that, and going back to a developer, trying to navigate all these different models and products that are out there, figuring out what's the result for the people that are going to live in the projects that are using that product that's very specific to their situation. Yeah.
Okay. So Josh, you mentioned on the call about you're reinventing this ecosystem that is within arm's reach of you, and Naomi and Anton are reinventing the supply ecosystem. When do they start kind of intersecting, and is there an opportunity as we're reinventing the whole thing?
I would say absolutely. I think that what we're really focused on is how to allow a group of residents and a property owner to drive the development process and to own the benefits of that process. And that same group could easily plug into the systems that Naomi and Anton are developing with a lot of benefit. We see a huge, the time of construction is a huge barrier. We've worked a lot with, by working with a property owner, you can avoid having to buy land and then do entitle for a year. So that's a huge cost savings. But then there's the construction, which can take 14 months typically. And so if that's sped up, that means a lot for the people that we're working with. I see a lot of potential with that.
So we talked about cost of there were 3 big ideas that we were all talking about on our pre-call. The cost of housing, we've talked about supply, the demand for housing, we've talked about the human element, and the third one was labor. We talked about the supply chain on materials, but there is this human element that's separate from the people who make this, arguably they're involved in making this stuff, but what can we say about labor? Naomi, you mentioned it in your opening comments that you would come back to it, but I think we should talk about labor right now.
Yeah, I mean, labor is the key piece of the functioning and success of our company, and the partnership with the Northern California Labor Union is absolutely key. And particularly on projects, because we're building for urban areas where prevailing wages are so important, and projects that are financed by public financing. More than that, Factory House takes a very holistic and humanistic approach to labor. It's critical for our diverse workforce, and I want to just mention we have incredibly diverse workforce. Including we have a partnership with Delancey Street and a prison union or industries, where we're hiring formerly incarcerated people. So we're providing training on the site. We're taking people who were working at Starbucks and doubling their wages immediately as soon as they walk in the door, and training them. But because our workforce is so diverse, and we know that we want to provide a humanistic work environment, we provide other things. In addition to training, we provide addiction recovery support groups. We're doing GED training so they can get their high school diplomas. We bring in fresh produce because many of the people come to work, they haven't even had anything to eat. We believe that healthy workers are more, and happy workers are more productive. And so that's a really, really key piece of yeah.
Well, thank you. And Anton, what's labor like in the WOHO environment?
Well, labor is a fundamental part in any industrial process that includes parts to be done in the software of the WOHO system. That means engineering, design, architecture. This is kind of labor that is very well integrated with the manufacturing labor, that it will be also very well integrated with the assembly one. Okay, so I think all our efforts was not to distinguish categories of, let's say, soft costs, GCing and subs, okay, as the way of conventionally understanding labor, but a totally, I would say, integrated stream of actions that occur in this transformation from data to matter, okay? And it includes the first developer sign of intuition in developing a project where WOHO embeds its intelligent labor into that early moment, all the way to the assembly where WOHO embeds assembliers to work directly with the GC. So I think it's just about efficiencies and to intelligently get a better, safer, speedier, and effective process.
Anton, you mentioned GCs. Do you need to train outside GCs to manage these projects, or do you manage your entire project from end to end?
Well, we think that WOHO wants to work with the industry, doesn't want to create a new industry. There's a huge industry operative and ready to welcome the innovation now. We've been hearing that this has not been the trend for the last years. It's not true. They're ready and they're willing to get confidence and start working with those companies that solve their problems. So we want to work with the dedicated GCs, the existing developers, all the prop tech companies, and just provide them a product that the industry doesn't have, that is the art of delivering the software and the hardware of a building, okay? And yes, we want to work with GCs, we want to work with developers, we want to work with prop tech companies, and we're ready to serve them.
And Naomi, you mentioned that you were architect agnostic. You work with outside architects.
Right. And I talked about how we're fully vertically integrated, but I also wanted to make sure it's really clear that we also work with third-party architects, engineers, general contractors, the whole stack. And in doing that, we're training them. And that I agree with Anton, it's critical that we're deploying the ecosystem in our region for our projects and training them for offsite. And one of the biggest barriers to kind of entry for developers is that they don't have a group of professionals who know how to integrate with us and interface.
Right.
So we're that's a big piece of our work as well, really important.
Thank you, Naomi. So we have just a couple of more minutes. So the final question or idea is about the pandemic, what we've all been through for the last year and a half, a huge human cost. But out of challenging times come innovative solutions. So for each of you, what lessons do you think we've learned, and what haven't we quite learned, or maybe what is unclear whether we've learned anything yet? But Josh, I'll start with you. What have we learned in the last year and a half?
All right, I'll start, but feel free to butt in. I think a big thing we've learned is how extreme the class and racial divide is in the country, and how structurally unjust systems have kind of bubbled to the surface. We're seeing those discrepancies between people who have had generational access to home ownership and wealth and people who have not, and what happens when a crisis hits. And so the way that I think this is something we knew was an issue, and now we're seeing the immense urgency of it, that the ability for people to have housing security and a stable place to live is immense. And it's fundamental to how you can weather situations like COVID, like losing your job, having something to fall back on, when you have families with generational wealth, and they have something to fall back on, and when you don't, then they do not. A thing that we're doing specifically is that we've built into our projects this immense operating and debt service reserve, so that if people lose their jobs, they, rather than getting evicted or getting foreclosed on, the co-op takes a lien on their resident share, equivalent to the amount of co-op fees they haven't been paying. And they can stay in their unit up to 8 months, where they continue to just build this lien that they can then start paying off. Once they get a job, they'll pay it off through their monthly payments in the same way that they were. So it's basically creating a safety net for both the co-op and for residents.
Sure.
But
Tamara?
I think part of the safety net is that there's a system for it. So it allows the co-op and neighbors to be kind to each other while making sense and feeling fair. And that's always a hard balance that we have with humanity, of how to be kind to the people around us, yet feel like it feels fair and it appears fair. And so that structure is it allows for an intimacy while providing a system.
Thank you, Tamara. Anton, lessons learned or opportunity?
Well, we founded WOHO with Deborah Mesa and Israel Ruiz 1 year ago in the middle of the growing pandemic. And I think what we've learned in this year is that we have a world and we do have a home, and we better take care of both.
Yeah. That's true. Thank you, Anton. And Naomi, I'll give you the last word.
Okay. Well, I just want to say I appreciate what Josh said about the inequities coming to the surface, because the last year was just tragic, and still is what we're seeing in terms of the bifurcation of our economy, and people are starving, and then the CEOs who are making triple this year. But anyways, to that, I think what we learned and what we put in place were really useful for going forward in other crises. And it kind of falls into, and I'll be quick, but it falls into 3 categories: instituting automation, securing supply chain partners, and diversifying our product mix. But in terms of automation, not just in terms of the equipment, but in terms of the workflow processes. And that allowed us to be able to separate our workers at 6 feet apart. It allowed us to interface with our third-party architects and engineers through BIM 360 communication. It allowed, actually, we created an app for our third-party quality QA/QC inspectors, that they didn't have to come into the factory, and they could see through video and through our live cameras what we were building. So the automation really allowed us to get through kind of the pandemic issues of needing to stay apart. I already spoke about the supply chain partners. That was really critical. And then diversifying product mix is that we were deemed an essential service when all other construction companies in California were shut down, because we were building for affordable housing. And so we get questioned all the time by potential investors and others saying, how are you going to be profitable if you're building 70% of your product for affordable housing? Well, here's a really good example. We were building throughout the pandemic when others couldn't.
You were the only ones working. So anyway, Naomi, thank you. I gave you the last word. Anton, thank you for joining us. Joshua, Tamara, and again, Naomi, thank you all for this really terrific conversation. And I'm sure there will be follow-up from the people who attended.